Perfect. All right.
Heath, what's going on? You want to be on the other side of this thing?
I do not.
The opening day was April 5, 1992, and I remember it distinctly because we had this 9-month lead up to it. And the last month or two, we realized we'd picked Time Change Sunday for our very first service, which is a terrible mistake, right? So nobody comes, well, few people who don't go to church come to church on Time Change Sunday, but I remember folks came, and it was kind of an amazing thing. I remember Jerry was in charge of some music, and we had some friends who volunteered. She had to also pick up a cake that day. Her dad and his wife came the day before, and they took care of Luke, who was about 1 year old. Then there was this huge scramble to get the worship folders ready and the music ready and the chairs ready. And eventually we got enough ready to hold a worship service, so that's pretty cool.
What were you feeling and thinking that morning?
Oh man, I was so nervous that morning. The night before, Jerry's dad said, let's go to dinner, because he stayed in a hotel with his wife. And so we went to dinner, and I just remember they're having this great, everybody else is enjoying this nice dinner, and I'm sitting here, my foot won't stop, tapping back and forth. My hand is like shaky, and so we were a little excited and a little nervous about what would happen. We called 15,000 people in our neighborhood, asked them a simple question: are you an active part of a local church? If they said yes, we are, we said, hey, thanks very much, we're getting to know our other neighbors tonight. If they said no, then we asked a couple follow-up questions, and ending with, and we send you a little piece of mail inviting you to our church service. And so folks came. It's sort of really a miracle that anybody would come because you called their house rather than slamming the phone down, right?
Tell me about the first service. Is it similar to what you do today, or how did that go?
It's similar to what we do today in this way, that a big emphasis is on welcoming folks who are brand new to the faith or who are players of faith. How we expressed that back then was a little bit different. We had a drama sketch every week. We had a children's message kind of geared just for the kids every week. We had music that always featured someone singing a solo, kind of like what Aaron does with the offering. But the principles, that kind of sense of having a space for people who don't know Jesus, who are wondering and exploring, that's the same. Now we have Eucharist every week. We didn't do that kind of stuff back then. How I became a church planter in the first place. Well, that's a long answer that could take probably an hour, but the short version is during seminary, Jerry and I were called to a small little startup church in Fairfield that was a church plant. It was one of the first two in our network, no nucleus church plants, where you just drop pastor and pastor's family in. And we were there for a year, and during that year, we were convinced this was what we were supposed to do as well. We saw the life change that happened. We saw people who had no experience with church, no interest in church, really going to church and becoming new in their faith in Jesus, and we were taken by that and wanted to be part of that as well. So the building that's behind us was our very first sanctuary. And by first sanctuary, I mean we were there for 12 and a half years. So if you step inside, you'll be amazed that anybody would keep going to that church for 12 and a half years. But I have so many memories of this building. This is where Rachel, my daughter, was baptized. This is where JJ, my son, was baptized. This is where 23 people were baptized at our first baptism service. This is where our very first service was, of course. And under this tree, when we first began, we had like one birth, and then we expanded to have two births, so to speak, of the warehouse. And then some junior high moms and dads came to me and said, we need to start a junior high thing, but we literally had no space. So for the first year, the junior high met under that tree and just kind of hung out. So if you like the youth group, that was the original youth group right there outside. When it rained, they came into the atrium, well, we called our atrium that. It's like a little baby box of an office. I'll just say we put that door in to let parents could hand their toddlers over the door. You know, that half door where they could see the kids, but the kids couldn't get out, that kind of thing.
Nice.
So here you are. And this was our little reception area, little welcome area, just barely big enough to turn around in.
How did
Oh, right.
this site how was it selected?
Well, it took us 12 and a half years to get all that momentum going, right? So we started to look early on, but because we were a no nucleus church plant, it just took a while for people to love us enough and trust us enough, especially trust. But when we started to talk about, we imagined a place that would be renewing for people both in the church and outside the church. We talked about a place that had a retreat-like setting. And then one of our images was of the monastic pattern of having a guest house. So when the monks pick a spot for the guest house, it's the best spot in the whole property because they want their guests are like Christ. And they want to honor Christ by honoring the stranger that they don't know. So all those things kind of went in when this piece of property became available with 100 acres around it that will never be built on. And we see that now with the housing. It was always in the future, now it's there. When we see that in place, we appreciate this site even more. So the idea of having a spot that's renewing and contemplative and also a wonderful place, beautiful place of God's creation to worship, all were in the factors. We just didn't know if we could ever afford that. That's partly why we moved from Rockland to Lincoln, is because back then in 2003, when we bought the property, it was significantly cheaper to be in Lincoln than Rockland, and still accessible to Rockland and Roseville and that kind of thing. Yeah, it was a small Sacramento firm that was bought up by Stan Tech, and they did a great job, we think. They had their first design came back, because we've looked at the warehouse now, and there are no windows in the sanctuary. We didn't get into the sanctuary, but there are no windows in the sanctuary. So they just assumed we wanted something like that. So they had, their first idea was, it looked like a junior high school gym with walls that went up, and then at the very top there are windows. And we're like, no, we selected this property on 100 open acres so we could see and be one with God's creation. And they got it on the second try and did a great job, I think. One of the big things to overcome is the price, right? Because even though it was a good deal by California standards, there was still nobody funding this for us. We had our network of churches kick in for about $300,000. We had an individual, not part of our church, but just had heard me preach one time in Modesto. He kicked in $100,000. We had another church that I knew the pastor of down in the Bakersfield area, Hanford area. They kicked in $100,000, and we needed to raise $300,000. I remember looking at our group in the warehouse and thinking, well, can we do this? Believing we could, but there's no evidence until you do it. And so we had this whole capital campaign called Building Grace. We called it Building Grace. And yeah, I still remember the day. Our target was $320,000. And you look around, it's just regular people. And I love regular people. I'm a regular people myself, right? But our target was $320,000. It came in at $323,000, and it literally brought tears to our eyes. I have other church planting friends whose church lasted maybe 3 years or 5 years or 12 years or 15 years. And that our church is alive and growing and going 30 years in is really a beautiful gift of God. That's one surprise. The other surprise, and maybe this seems expected, but I never take it for granted. I remember about a year into the church life, we were still at the warehouse, and I felt myself relaxing a little bit. And I told you how nervous, I was pretty nervous that first Sunday. Just would people come? How would it go? That kind of thing. Because we had a lot kind of at stake, it felt like. And about a year in, I felt myself relaxing a little bit, and I thought, I like these people. And I don't know if subconsciously I was thinking, we're going to start a church where I didn't like the people, and it may seem shallow, but that taking joy in each other and celebrating each other, that is just a beautiful gift of God. And I think the grace of God's still at work, still bringing people who are surprised to be here. That never gets old for me.